I stepped into my own house, and it felt like stepping into someone else's life. The familiar warmth, the small signs of home I had held on to during those long, brutal months overseas, were nowhere to be found. The furniture, rearranged. The walls, bare of the family photos that had once told the story of our lives. My favorite chair by the window was missing, replaced by a sleek, unfamiliar recliner. The smell hit me next. It was sharp and invasive, a masculine cologne I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. The realization crept in slowly, like a shadow growing darker with every second. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I called out, "Amanda." My voice echoed in the stillness of the house. No answer. I stepped further inside, scanning the room, my boots leaving faint impressions on the carpet I used to vacuum every Sunday. My duffel bag slipped from my shoulder, thudding to the floor. The sound barely registered because, just then, heavy footsteps sounded from the hallway. A man emerged, a stranger. He was tall, shirtless, and exuded the kind of smug confidence that could only come from knowing you didn't belong but daring someone to tell you otherwise. His eyes met mine, and he smirked, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You must be Matthew," he said, his tone laced with mockery. "I'm Nick. This is my place now." My place. His place. "What the hell are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice sharp with disbelief. Nick crossed his arms over his bare chest, the muscles in his biceps flexing slightly, as if he wanted to make sure I noticed. "Amanda told me you might show up. I was hoping you wouldn't, but here you are. Look, buddy, you need to leave. You're trespassing." Trespassing? The word nearly choked me. I took a step forward, fists clenched at my sides. My heart pounded, a mix of confusion and rage. "Who the hell are you to tell me to leave my own house?" Before I could say more, a voice from the hallway cut through the tension like a knife. "Matthew." I turned and saw her, Amanda. She stepped out from the shadows, wearing a silk robe that screamed intimacy, not welcome home comfort. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. It was the kind of polished look that took time, effort, planning. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of surprise or guilt in her eyes, but it vanished almost instantly, replaced by something colder. "You're home early," she said flatly, crossing her arms. No hug, no smile, no relief to see me standing there in one piece. Just, detachment. Like I was the one intruding. "Amanda," I said, my voice trembling. "What's going on? Who is this?" Her lips tightened into a thin line, and she glanced at Nick before looking back at me. "This is Nick," she said, her voice void of emotion. "He lives here now." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I'd just heard. "He what?" "Amanda, what are you talking about? This is our house." "It was," she said, her tone steady, almost rehearsed. "But things have changed, Matthew. You've been gone for a long time." "A long time?" "I was deployed. For us. For Jacob. I'd survived gunfire, explosions, and the constant threat of death. And this is what I came home to. Where's Jacob?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Where's my son?" Her gaze faltered for just a moment. "He's not here." "Not here? What do you mean he's not here?" Panic crept into my voice. "Where is he?" Amanda sighed, like I was inconveniencing her with my questions. "He got into some trouble and he left." "Trouble?" I took another step forward. "What kind of trouble, Amanda? Why would Jacob leave? He's 16. He's a kid." She didn't meet my eyes. "He's not a kid anymore, Matthew. He made his choices." "That doesn't explain anything," I said, my frustration boiling over. "What did you do?" Her face hardened, and she took a step back, as though retreating from the weight of my accusation. "Don't put this on me, Matthew. You're the one who left. You think you can just come back and play the hero? Life didn't stop because you weren't here." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had always known the deployment was hard on Amanda. I had written her letters, called when I could, and clung to the hope that she understood why I had to be away. But now, standing in what was supposed to be our home, I realized I had been holding on to a lie. Nick stepped closer, his smirk returning. "Look, man," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You need to move on. Amanda's with me now. This is our house. You don't belong here anymore." Something inside me snapped. My fists clenched, and I felt the urge to launch myself at him, to wipe that smug grin off his face. But I didn't. Years of military training kicked in, reminding me to stay calm, to think. I wouldn't let him, or Amanda, see me lose control. I turned to her, my voice quieter but no less intense. "Amanda, where's Jacob? Tell me the truth." For the first time, her facade cracked. Her lips trembled, and she looked away. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He got mixed up with the wrong people. He left a few months ago. I haven't heard from him since." Her words knocked the wind out of me. My son, my boy, the kid who used to beg me to play catch in the yard, was gone. I felt a wave of nausea, the weight of everything crashing down at once. I thought about all the letters he had written to me while I was deployed, his updates about school, his excitement about getting his driver's license. How had it all gone so wrong? Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. I heard Amanda call my name, but I didn't stop. My vision blurred as I stepped onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting me like a slap. My home was gone. My family was gone. And I didn't even know where to begin picking up the pieces. The door closed behind me with a sharp click, sealing me out of the life I thought I was returning to. As I climbed into my truck and started the engine, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all mixed together, forming a storm that threatened to overwhelm me. But I wouldn't let it. Not yet. There were too many unanswered questions, too much at stake. I didn't know where Jacob was, but I would find him. And as for Amanda and Nick, they hadn't seen the last of me. This wasn't over. I drove aimlessly, the events of the last hour playing on a loop in my mind. Amanda's indifference, Nick's smugness, and the bombshell that Jacob was gone gnawed at me like a wound that refused to close. My truck eventually rolled to a stop outside a dingy bar on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered, casting shadows across the gravel parking lot. I needed clarity, space to think, and maybe a drink strong enough to drown the questions screaming in my head. The bar was dimly lit, its air heavy with the scent of stale beer and regret. I slid onto a stool and ordered a whiskey. I stared at the amber liquid in my glass, swirling it absently as I replayed Amanda's words. He got into some trouble and left. I don't know where he is. What kind of mother doesn't know, or care, where her son is? My hands clenched around the glass, the urge to lash out surging, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help Jacob. Matthew Holt. A familiar voice cut through the haze of my thoughts. I turned to see Richard, an old friend and retired army buddy. His gruff voice and weathered face brought an odd sense of comfort. He dropped onto the stool beside me, signaling the bartender for 2 beers. "I thought that was you," he said, his sharp eyes scanning my face. "You look like you've been through hell." I chuckled bitterly. "Something like that." He didn't press immediately, giving me space to find my words. Eventually, the dam broke. I told him everything, the homecoming, Amanda's betrayal, Nick's presence, and, most importantly, Jacob's disappearance. Richard listened in silence, his expression hardening with every word. When I finished, he leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "Let me get this straight," he said. "Your wife shacked up with some guy, cleaned you out, and left your son to fend for himself. Is that about right?" I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Saying it out loud made it feel even more surreal. "Unbelievable," he muttered, shaking his head. "But if Jacob's gone, it's not just about the affair. Something bigger is going on." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. Richard leaned in, lowering his voice. "Trouble doesn't just find kids like Jacob unless someone or something is pushing them in that direction. If Amanda's been playing house with this Nick guy, there's a good chance Jacob felt abandoned, and when kids feel abandoned, they look for belonging elsewhere." "Like a gang," I said, the realization hitting me like a freight train. Richard nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if that's the case, we need to find him fast." The weight of Richard's words settled over me. My son wasn't just missing, he was in danger. A mix of anger and fear coursed through me. I couldn't let him slip away, not after everything I'd been through to come back to him. "How do we find him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Richard's eyes glinted with determination. "First, we figure out how deep this mess goes. And we start with Amanda." The next morning, I parked my truck a block away from the house and walked the rest of the way. My body was tense, every step heavier than the last. Amanda's betrayal had cut deep, but now I needed answers. For Jacob's sake, I couldn't let my emotions get in the way. When I knocked, Nick answered the door again, his smirk returning as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "You didn't get the message last night," he sneered. "I'm not here for you," I said, brushing past him and stepping into the house. "Amanda. Get out here." Amanda appeared from the kitchen, her robe swapped for a casual sweater and jeans, her expression guarded. "Matthew, I told you." I cut her off. "I don't care what you told me. Where's Jacob? And don't give me the same useless answer as before." Her eyes flickered with irritation. "I already told you, I don't know." "You don't know," I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you even care?" "He's our son, Amanda." She folded her arms, a defensive posture that only fueled my anger. "Of course I care, but he's not a little boy anymore. He made his choices, Matthew. I can't control him." "Made his choices?" I snapped. Or was he forced into them because his mother was too busy playing house with this idiot? Nick stepped forward, his smirk gone. "Watch it, man." I turned on him, my voice sharp and unwavering. "You don't want to be part of this conversation." Nick hesitated, clearly weighing whether it was worth escalating. He stayed silent, though his clenched fist suggested he didn't like it. I turned back to Amanda. "What did you do with the savings, Amanda?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced away. That reaction was all the confirmation I needed. "How much?" I pressed. "How much did you take?" "It's none of your business," she said, her voice shaky. I let out a bitter laugh. "None of my business? It's my money, Jacob's money. And you spent it on him." I pointed at Nick, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. Amanda didn't deny it, which only made my fury burn hotter. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You left Jacob with nothing. You left him vulnerable. And now he's gone, caught up in God knows what, because you were too busy funding your new life to care." Her face paled, but she still didn't speak. I shook my head in disgust and turned to leave. "This isn't over," I said as I opened the door. "You're going to tell me everything. Whether you like it or not." Richard was waiting for me at a small cafe downtown, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. His face was unreadable, but I could tell by his stiff posture that he had news. "Well?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He handed me a small folder. I did some digging. Jacob got mixed up with a gang a few months back. They've got a reputation, rough crowd. But here's the kicker, Amanda's been siphoning money out of your account for months. And some of it went to these guys. What? I opened the folder, my stomach sinking as I scanned the bank statements and transaction details. Looks like she paid them off, Richard said grimly. Probably to keep them off her back, or Jacob's. The weight of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. Amanda hadn't just neglected Jacob, she had actively fed the problem, whether out of desperation or selfishness. This is worse than I thought, I muttered, my hands trembling as I closed the folder. Richard placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. We'll find him, Matt. But this isn't just about getting him back. You're going to need to fight for him, for everything. I nodded, my jaw set with determination. Amanda had made her choices, and so had Nick. But Jacob? He didn't deserve any of this. And I wasn't about to let him slip away without a fight. I sat in my truck outside the cafe, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Richard's words echoed in my mind. Amanda had drained our savings. Jacob was in trouble, tangled up with a gang. And Nick was just the smug cherry on top of this hellish sundae. I had left everything behind to serve my country, trusting that Amanda would keep our family together. Now, I wasn't sure what hurt more, losing my son to the streets or realizing Amanda had cared so little about the life we built together. The betrayal wasn't just in the affair or the money, it was in every lie, every secret, every time she chose herself over our family. I leaned back in the seat, staring blankly at the dashboard as the weight of it all settled over me. My chest felt heavy, my thoughts tangled in a chaotic mess of anger, grief, and disbelief. The first time I held Jacob, his cries filled the delivery room, tiny fists flailing. I had been terrified. Amanda had laughed at my clumsiness as I tried to figure out how to cradle him without dropping him. You'll get the hang of it, she'd said, her smile radiant. And I had. I stayed up late with him during those first sleepless months, pacing the living room while Amanda rested. I built forts in the living room and taught him to throw a football in the backyard. Even when I was deployed, I never stopped being his dad. Every letter he sent reminded me why I was fighting, to give him a future where he could feel safe, loved, and free to dream. And now? Now he was gone, pulled into a world I had fought to shield him from. Because Amanda couldn't keep it together. The rage was there, boiling just beneath the surface, but I pushed it down. Rage wouldn't help me now. I needed to think, to plan. This wasn't like a firefight where instinct took over. This was a battle of wits, one I couldn't afford to lose. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as I let my thoughts settle. The pain was still sharp, but a new feeling was creeping in, a sense of purpose. Amanda and Nick thought they had one. They thought I'd roll over and disappear, leaving them to enjoy the life they'd stolen. But they were wrong. I wasn't going anywhere. And I wasn't giving up on Jacob. The next morning, I parked outside the courthouse and made my way inside, the folder Richard had given me tucked under my arm. The evidence of Amanda's financial misdeeds wasn't just a smoking gun, it was a nuclear bomb. I sat down with a lawyer I had used before and laid everything on the table. She drained our accounts while I was deployed, I said, my voice steady. Some of it went to a gang. I want to make sure she doesn't get away with this. The lawyer nodded, flipping through the documents. We can file for divorce and request an emergency hearing for custody, he said. Given the circumstances, the court will take this very seriously. The word divorce hung in the air, heavy and final. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. For all our ups and downs, I had loved Amanda. But this wasn't love anymore. This was survival, for me and Jacob. Later that evening, I returned to the house. Amanda opened the door, her face pale when she saw me. Matthew, what are you doing here? I'm here for answers, I said, stepping inside. And I'm not leaving until I get them. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the living room where Nick sat watching TV. Can we do this another time? No, I said firmly. We're doing this now. Amanda sighed and led me to the kitchen, where she leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. What do you want? The truth, I said, my voice low but steady. About Jacob. About the money. About why you decided to destroy everything we built. Her expression flickered, a mixture of guilt and defiance. I didn't destroy anything, Matthew. You left. You chose the army over us. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. I chose the army to provide for you. To give Jacob a stable life. And this is what you did with it. She looked away, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. Nick said. I cut her off, my anger surging. Nick? Nick doesn't matter. Jacob matters. Our family mattered. And you threw it all away. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't let them sway me. I had been through too much, seen too much, to let her manipulate me with crocodile tears. I need to know everything, I said, my voice hard. Every detail about what happened to Jacob and why he's gone. She hesitated, then finally started talking. The story she told was worse than I had imagined. Jacob had started acting out shortly after I deployed, skipping school and getting into fights. Amanda, overwhelmed and distracted by her new relationship with Nick, had let it slide until it spiraled out of control. When Jacob got involved with the gang, Amanda had tried to fix it by paying them off. But her payments had only made things worse, creating a cycle she couldn't escape. Eventually, Jacob left, angry and feeling abandoned. As she finished, her shoulders slumped. I didn't know what else to do, she said softly. I shook my head, my heart heavy. You should have called me, I said. You should have fought for him. Instead, you let him fall through the cracks. Amanda didn't respond, her silence speaking louder than words. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the kitchen. The night air was cool as I stepped onto the porch. I stared up at the stars, their light cold and distant. I thought about Jacob, wondering where he was and if he was safe. My mind wandered to the letters he had written me during my deployment, his excitement about the future, his pride in being my son. That Jacob was still out there, somewhere. And I was going to find him. I pulled out my phone and called Richard. We need to move fast, I said. I'm not letting this go. Richard's voice was steady on the other end. I'll dig deeper. We'll find him, Matt. We'll bring him home. I nodded, a renewed sense of purpose settling over me. Amanda had shattered my trust, but she hadn't broken me. Jacob was worth fighting for. And I wasn't about to let him down. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The house looked the same from the outside, white siding, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a driveway that should have been a homecoming. But I knew better. The truth of what lay inside had been exposed. My home had become a symbol of betrayal, but that was about to change. I adjusted my jacket, the thick folder of evidence tucked securely under my arm. The courthouse had been efficient, and my lawyer had done his job well. The papers in this folder weren't just a legal weapon, they were my ticket to reclaiming what was mine. I knocked on the door, loud and firm. After a few seconds, Nick answered, his face immediately souring when he saw me. What do you want now? He sneered. I stepped forward, forcing him to back up or risk being shoved aside. Get Amanda, I said. We need to talk. Nick hesitated, probably debating whether to push back, but something in my demeanor must have warned him off. He retreated down the hallway, and moments later, Amanda appeared, her expression a mix of annoyance and apprehension. This better be quick, Matthew, she said. We have plans. Oh, I'll make it quick, I replied, placing the folder on the dining table. I opened it, spreading out bank statements, transaction records, and a list of the money she'd funneled into the gang and squandered on her new lifestyle. Her face paled as she scanned the documents. What is this?" she stammered. "This is the truth," I said, my voice cold. "You stole from me, from Jacob. You drained our accounts and handed our money to a gang. You let your son get swallowed up by a life you should have protected him from. And now, Amanda, it's over." Nick stepped forward, glancing at the papers. "You can't just." I turned to him, cutting him off. "This doesn't concern you, Nick. You're a guest in this house, and as of now, your stay is over. I've filed for divorce. I've also filed for sole custody of Jacob, though Amanda didn't seem to care enough to fight for him. The evidence here ensures that she won't get a dime. And you," I smirked. "You're welcome to go with her." "You can't do this," Amanda cried, her voice rising in panic. "You have no right." I leaned in, my voice low and steady. "I have every right. And I've given you every chance. Pack your things, Amanda. You and Nick need to be gone by tomorrow." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't falter. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about Jacob. Amanda had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. That night, Richard and I sat in his truck outside a crumbling building on the edge of town. The place was a known hangout for the gang that had taken Jacob in. The glow of a single bulb above the entrance flickered sporadically, casting long shadows across the alley. "You ready for this?" Richard asked, his voice calm but serious. I nodded. "Let's get my son." We moved quickly, slipping through the shadows like we were back in a combat zone. Richard had already done the legwork, identifying the room where Jacob was likely being kept. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the low murmur of voices. We found Jacob in a back room, huddled in a corner. He looked thinner, his face gaunt, and his eyes hollow with exhaustion. But when he saw me, a flicker of recognition and relief crossed his face. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. I crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to my knees in front of him. "It's me, Jacob," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here to take you home." Tears welled in his eyes, and for a moment, he looked like the boy I remembered, the one who used to beg me to throw a football in the yard. I pulled him into a tight embrace, feeling the weight of the past months lift slightly. But our reunion was cut short by the sound of footsteps. Richard stood guard by the door, his stance tense. "We've got company," he said. A gang member appeared in the doorway, his expression hardening when he saw us. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled. I stepped forward, shielding Jacob behind me. "We're leaving," I said firmly. "And you're going to let us?" The man laughed, but it faltered when Richard stepped into view, his military stance unmistakable. "You don't want to do this," Richard said, his voice low and menacing. "Trust me." The gang member hesitated, then stepped aside, muttering under his breath. We didn't wait for him to change his mind. Richard and I guided Jacob out of the building and into the night. Back at my house, the emptiness was palpable. Amanda and Nick were gone, and the silence felt both strange and freeing. Jacob sat on the couch, staring at the floor as I handed him a glass of water. "Talk to me," I said gently. "What happened?" He hesitated, then began to speak, his voice trembling. He told me about the fights with Amanda, the nights he spent alone while she was out with Nick, and the gang that offered him a sense of belonging when his family fell apart. "I didn't know what else to do," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought you weren't coming back." My chest tightened. "I'm sorry, Jacob," I said, my voice raw. "I should have been here. I should have protected you." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. "Can we start over, Dad?" I nodded, my own tears threatening to spill. "Yeah, son. We can." The next morning, Jacob and I stood outside the house, the sun rising over the neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of a new day. I glanced at him, his face calmer, the shadows in his eyes beginning to lift. As we walked down the driveway together, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle I had fought at home was unlike anything I'd faced overseas. It was messier, more personal. But I had survived, and so had Jacob. "The war I fought overseas didn't prepare me for this," I said quietly, "but it taught me resilience. And that's what I needed to save you, and to rebuild our lives." Jacob looked up at me, his expression thoughtful. "Thanks for not giving up on me." "Never," I said firmly. "We stick together, no matter what." As we walked away from the house, I felt a sense of closure. Amanda and Nick were the past. Jacob and I were the future. And for the first time in a long time, that future felt bright.